Thank you, Bill. Might as well just stay here, I guess. Thank you all for coming. I hope you can. Can you all hear me back there? Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's start. Um, Let me tell you about the book, and then I'll tell you some stories from the book. Basically, probably the question I get asked the most, until Trump got elected anyway, was, is being a senator as much fun as working on Saturday Night Live? And of course the answer is no. Why would it be? But it's the best job I've ever had, because you get to get things done and that improve people's lives. And so, and that's what Paul Wellstone, I dedicate the book to Paul and to his wife Sheila. And Paul said that politics isn't about power, isn't about winning for the sake of winning. It's about working to improve people's lives. And that's the most satisfying thing I get to do. And now sometimes, and lately, that means stopping things that are going to hurt people, I think. And I'll probably talk about healthcare. I talk about how we passed the ACA and what it is, essentially, in the book. In the book, I do a short version of my life until I decide that I'm going to run. And that includes SNL, and it has 3 chapters of SNL, which are SNL, not the drug part, SNL, the drug part, and I can't remember what the third part is. But I guess that's the part when I leave. And I talk about the campaign, and then I talk about what it's like working in the Senate. And I think I'll just start there. As you may remember, my first election was very close. I beat Norm Coleman by 312 votes. And it was a close one. So I'm the poster child for close elections, and I'm the poster child for every vote counts, and every vote counts, believe me. And that was a long process. On election night, the morning after the election, I was behind by about 725 votes. And Norm Coleman said, if I were Franken, I'd step back and let the healing begin. And I wanted to say something, but I learned something during the whole campaign, and then, which was not to trust my instincts, because my staff told me don't say anything. And through the whole process, it took 8 months, remember, I just did, the only time I said anything was every time I won. I won the recount, and I came out of my house with my wife, and, with great humility, and accepted the victory, and then he went to court. As soon as I won the recount, he then took the anti-healing position, and stuck with it for another 6 months until the Supreme Court, the Minnesota Supreme Court, ruled in my favor, and then I went to the Senate. So I got there a little late. I went there knowing that I couldn't be funny. That the Coleman campaign had put everything I'd ever done in comedy for the past 37 years or whatever it was, put through a very sophisticated $15 million machine called the dehumorizer. And it was built with Israeli technology, and it just took the humor out of the context. In satire, you use things like irony and hyperbole and sometimes ambiguity, And when you take that stuff out, what's left can be very offensive. I'll give you an example. I wrote a joke in an article I wrote, and it was really a very conservative joke. It was a conservative joke, basically saying that parents should probably monitor what their kids look at on the internet. And here was the joke. The joke was, the internet is a great learning tool. My son did a great 6th grade report last year on bestiality, and he using the internet, and he downloaded a lot of great visual aids, and the kids in his class just loved them because, at that age, they're just sponges. And that was the joke, and the joke is, I think, clear. It's ironic, don't you think? And so, but they did it. They ran an ad which was, Al Franken, jokes about bestiality, and it was like from infinity into your living room, through your eyeballs, and then rattled in the back of your brain. And my mother-in-law cried when she saw that. It was a tough campaign. So when I got to the Senate, I realized I had to show the people of Minnesota that I was serious, and I was. I wanted to show them that, and I said, okay, I'm not going to do any national press. I'm just going to do Minnesota press, and I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to not say anything funny in public. And my colleagues got, a lot of my Republican colleagues were suspicious because I had used humor in a large part to heap scorn and ridicule on Republicans. So, but right away they got it. My colleagues, they got it. I got sworn in. A number of them showed up for that, I think out of respect for how long it took. And a couple minutes after I was sworn in, Jim DeMint, very, very right-wing conservative from South Carolina, who later became head of the Heritage Foundation, came up to me and said, how are things on the far left? And I said, they're great. How are things on the nutcase right? And he laughed, and we were friends ever since. We still are. And I found my Republican colleagues and I write about them more than my Democratic colleagues because they're all great. Well, they're brilliant and great and hilarious. I had to find something good to say about the Republicans, and you do work across party lines to get things done. You have to, and that's why Ted Cruz hasn't gotten anything done while he's been in Senate, except get the Congress shut down or the government shut down. But like Lindsey Graham, I'd say is the funniest Republican. When he was running like 15th out of 17 in the 2016 primaries, I ran into him in the bathroom, actually, and I said, Lindsey, if I were voting in the Republican primaries, I'd vote for you. And he said, that's my problem. And Pat Roberts of Kansas is funny. He and I love Jack Benny. I'm trying to see how old the crowd is. Some of you may remember Jack Benny. And Jack Benny used to have this character actor on his show all the time, Frank Nelson. He had like a pencil mustache and he was kind of balding. And Jack Benny would come up to a counter and go, sir, and he would turn around, may I help you? You again. So whenever I see Pat, I go, may I help you? And he says, you again. No one knows what we're talking about, but we have fun. One colleague, however, Tom Coburn, had no discernible sense of humor. And actually kind of still doesn't. Does make him a bad guy, and he actually acknowledges it. So, like the first 3 or 4 exchanges that I had with Tom, we just did not connect at all. So after I was there a couple weeks, I said, Tom, can I take you out to lunch? And he said, well, take me out to breakfast. So I said, okay. So we met for breakfast a couple days later, a couple more, 8 in the morning. And I said, look, let's, for the next 40, 45 minutes, whatever this is, let's just have fun, okay? He goes, oh, okay. And I said, and we can talk about our families, we can talk about politics, talk about our careers. Okay, now he was known as Dr. No in the Senate. He was called Dr. No because he had been a doctor. He was an obstetrician gynecologist before he was in Congress. And the no part was he was an extreme right-wing federalist and felt that only the states should do anything pretty much. So he put holds on things. So I said, let's just, we can talk about our politics, talk about our families, our careers, whatever, but let's just have fun. He said, oh, okay, fun. So I said, okay, let me ask you this. To be a doctor, let's talk about our careers. To be a doctor in Oklahoma, do you have to have any formal education? And he said, yes, you've got to go to medical school. And I said, okay, that was a joke. And that's what I used to do, you see, in my career. I used to do jokes. And then he calmed down, and the rest of the breakfast, I explained what jokes were. And what the proper reaction is to a joke. And we had a good time. We had fun. And he wrote a note to me that was delivered to my office that said I had a lot of fun. And so now in the book, I make it a policy. There's a protocol in the Senate, which is you don't tell about private conversations you've had with someone if it could make them look bad without getting their permission. So I called Tom. I make an exception. That's Ted Cruz, and I'll talk about that in a while. When I was writing the book, and Tom Coburn is retired now, so I call him in Oklahoma, where he's retired, and I said, I call him, hi, Tom, it's Al Franken. Oh, hi, how you doing? I'm good, Tom. How are you? I'm good. And I said, I'm writing a book, and do you remember the breakfast we had, like the first couple of weeks I was there? And he goes, oh, yeah, and I made sure the story was right. And he said, no, that's right. And I said, well, look, I'm writing this book, and I want to include the story, and I wanted to get your permission. And he said, we have a First Amendment. You can write anything you want. And I said, well, yeah, I understand that. It's just that as a courtesy, I wanted to ask you, well, you're a gentleman. But we have a First Amendment. If I write a book, I'm going to write anything I want. So I, well, okay, thanks. And then we talked about our grandchildren. He has grandchildren, and any of your grandparents here. I'm not pointing at you because you look old. I find you look avuncular, like an uncle. Nephews, nieces. Sorry, you look. I have 3 grandchildren, so I don't look that. I mean, I look older than you. Okay, so back to the Senate. I write about the Koch brothers in here, Siegfried and Roy Koch, and what they and Citizens United has done to our politics. And to me, climate change is an existential threat, and maybe the most important issue that we have in front of us. And because of the Koch brothers, who made their billions in fossil fuels primarily, and Citizens United, Republicans have now stopped actually admitting that we have a thing called climate change. And because they worry about, I'm on the energy committee, it's one of my committees, and they just don't want to be primaried. And they know the Koch brothers will dump 10, 20, 30 million on them, and they're worried mainly about being beaten by a Republican. And so, and I don't want, in 50 years to have my grandchildren say to me, Grandpa, you were a senator, you knew climate change was happening, why didn't you do anything? And also, why are you still alive? Because I'll be like 116. So I'm getting hot here. So Cruz, I write about Cruz as the exception to the rule. Cruz, he's like a toxic coworker. He's like the guy in your place in the lunchroom who puts fish in the microwave. He's that guy, and he just doesn't work with anybody else. And his word isn't good. And I back all this up in here. I do explain why I take some license there, made an exception with him, and he really is the exception, proves the rule, because you're in a small workplace. You have 100 people essentially who have the same job, and you got to work with them. And Ted doesn't. There's a story. I'll just tell some fun stories. So he got off to a very, very bad start, offending people all over the place. And about 3 months into his term, I guess he won in, I guess it was in 14. So in 2000, in March of 2015, Amy Klobuchar, my senior senator in Minnesota, who's very funny, she was asked to do the gridiron dinner. And Amy will not let me write a joke for her because she doesn't, if people ask her and she wants to say no and she wants to be honest about it, but she will run them by me. And now you'll remember at that, during that period, there was, wait a minute, I guess that was 2013 because he's running this cycle, so it's 2013. So that was about when the Carnival Cruise thing happened. Remember, the Carnival Cruise went out the line, the boat, I guess, the liner, and it died. The electricity went out, and it was there for like 10 days before it got towed in, and nothing worked. And it was nicknamed the Poop Cruise because nothing worked, and it was not pretty being on that ship, and people wanted their money back because that was their vacation, and you don't want poop floating around your feet during vacation. That's not a good vacation. You got to admit. Okay, so Amy wrote a joke which was when most people think of a bad cruise, they think of Carnival. But we think of Ted. Okay. So I said, okay, well, that's a good joke. I got to rewrite that I think is better, Amy. And I'll tell you that's the end of the story. So the next Thursday, I see Amy kind of going around the floor, talking to Chuck Schumer, and I knew she had a joke about Chuck. And then she went to another senator who I knew she had written a joke about. And then she heads over to Cruz. And I went, I want to be there for this. So she goes up to Ted, and I make myself part of a conversation triangle, I guess. And she goes, I've written a joke about you from doing the gridiron dinner, and I have a joke about you that I'd just like, get your permission to use. And he goes, well, what's the joke? And she said, when most people think of a difficult cruise, not bad, she says difficult cruise, they think of Carnival. We Democrats in the Senate think of Ted. So she softened the joke. She went from bad to difficult, and she's gone from we to we Democrats in the Senate to soften it up a little bit. And he goes, what if you changed difficult to challenging? And I see Amy, and he sees it too, go like, okay, now it's not funny. It's just not funny anymore. And he can see that. He's very smart. And he goes like, I'll tell you what. I believe in the First Amendment. You go ahead and tell your joke. And I went, oh, God, I don't like him. And I said, Ted, I've actually done a rewrite on Amy's joke that I think is a lot better. Do you want to hear it? And Amy, I see Amy go like, oh, no. Al's going to do this, and I want to be here for it. So Ted goes, sure. And I go, okay. When most people think of a cruise as full of shit, they think of Carnival. But we think of Ted. And the thing about it was an entirely fair joke. And you'll just have to take my word for it until you read the chapter in the book. And then you'll go like, okay, that was completely fair. I'm glad Al did that. So I talk about a number of issues in here. Healthcare, which this latest healthcare incarnation of their healthcare bill in the Senate is awful, almost as awful or worse than the House bill. It's basically taking healthcare away from the people who need it the most and giving a big tax cuts to people who need it the least. And that's why it has about a 17, this last I heard, a 17% approval rating around the country, which is, by the way, the exact number of Americans who have personally seen a ghost. So, and I don't know what the Venn diagram, I'm sure it's very close, the same people. But so we're coming back on Monday, and I'm glad they couldn't get the vote done before the 4th of July weekend. I think some of them, even though they were afraid to show up for parades and for town halls, I think they've gotten the message. So this is going to be, I'm hoping they don't get 50 votes, and then I hope they come and help us and work on making the ACA work better. And there's areas to do that. And that means getting the exchanges more competitive. They've done everything they can to undermine that. I don't want to get into the weeds here, but they've done that, and Trump has certainly done that by not enforcing the mandate. They did it by getting rid of something called risk corridors in 2015, which drove insurance companies out of the exchange. And we need a public option so that people in every county in the country can. And we also need to address pharmaceutical costs, and I have a comprehensive bill to do that. And we're actually having hearings on that now. But I kind of go back to how the ACA passed and why we did it the way we did it. There are, I'm sure, a lot of people in this room. I was for single payer back in 2009. But as I write, we needed 60 votes. And we were about 55 or 50 votes short. So now, when I ran for the Senate, Norm Coleman, my opponent, who was a senator, he would say at debates about health care, he'd say, we have the best health care system in the world, he would say. And he'd say, because we have Mayo. And we do have the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and there's probably no place on earth better than Mayo. But Mayo isn't a system. It isn't a healthcare system. And we don't have a system in our, we certainly didn't then. T.R. Reid wrote a book about this. He was a correspondent, international correspondent for the Washington Post, and observed all the different healthcare systems over the world. And he basically said, we don't have a healthcare system here in the United States. We have a lot of different systems. If you're in Medicare, you're in the Canadian system. If you're in the VA or the military, you're in the British system, socialized medicine. If you get it from your employer, you're in the German system. And if you don't have health insurance, you're in the Cambodian system. And what we were trying to do with the Affordable Care Act is get people in the Cambodian system into one of the other systems. And it was either single payer and Medicaid or into a private insurer through the exchanges. And we had over 20 million Americans more covered, and people got covered have better health outcomes. And there's just a study in the New England Journal of Medicine that is a survey study of all the different studies saying that this is the case. And if you get your insurance through Medicaid, your improvement by having insurance is just as good as private insurance, if not better. So this has worked, and what they want to do is get rid of Medicaid expansion. They want to defund it about $700–800 billion and use that for a huge tax cut for the wealthy. So I'm going to fight that, and I need you to help. You've got two terrific senators here in California. We don't have to worry about that. But if you know people in some of the key states, ask your friends and relatives there to write their Republican senator who might be on the fence. And I think they have people on one side, the Susan Collinses and the Lisa Murkowskis and the Dean Hellers on one side, and they have Cruz and Rand Paul and Mike Lee on the other side. So I don't know how they get 50 votes, and I think that's a good thing, and I hope we can get some bipartisan work together to make Obamacare work and work better. So that's one of the issues I write about. I talk about, as a senator, then I'll tell this story and then I'll open it to questions, that I still am optimistic. And I'm optimistic because of, I represent Minnesota. I went to Israel in 2010 and met with members of the Knesset. I had been to Israel before, but this is the first time I'd met with members of the Knesset, and I realized that every one of them represents all of Israel. There's no one in the Knesset who represents the northern suburbs of Tel Aviv, like we have in Congress or in the House. And I realized that I represent Minnesota. We have two senators who represent Minnesota, so I represent Minnesota's interests. And you really get to know, when you're a senator, you get to know your state. It's harder in California. You're 40 million people. That's harder than a state like Minnesota, which is 5.5 million people. But you get to know the people of your state. And when I went back to explore running for the Senate, Franny and I moved, my wife and I moved from New York to Minnesota to explore it. I really just enjoyed going around the state. At the DFL party, that's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, we have these things called bean feeds. And that's sort of the local organizing principle of the Democratic Party in Minnesota. And I've just been really impressed with how great people in my state are. And I'm sure they're great here. And I want to close with a story about Wilmer, Minnesota. And last year I went to the high school commencement there because I invited myself. And I'll tell you a little bit about Wilmer, and I'll tell you about why I invited myself. Wilmer is a town in south central Minnesota. It's an agricultural town. It's the heart of turkey producing country. Minnesota is the largest producer of turkeys. I invited myself there because I wanted to introduce the class speaker. And the class speaker had been a Senate page, been represented Minnesota as one of the 30 pages in her class, and her name is Muna Abdullahi. And the day she came, my office staff told me, well, the new page class is here, and we have a Minnesota girl here, and she's from Wilmer, and she's a Somali Minnesota girl. And I went, oh, okay. And they said, and she, her principal had recommended her. She did a great interview, and her essay was terrific. And I said, oh, great. Well, let's go down. I want to go down and meet her. And I go down to the floor, and there's 30 pages down there, and she's easy to pick out. She's Somali, and she's got a hijab over her page uniform. And so I go up to her, and I say, you look like a Minnesotan. And she said, yeah, she smiled. And so I got to know her, and when the new Somali ambassador of the United States came to visit senators to talk about some issues that we have, the states that have a large Somali population, I invited her because I wanted the ambassador from Somalia to see that we had a Somali Minnesotan as one of our pages. And so that's you're a junior when you're a page. So she goes back to school, obviously, and I hear she's chosen to be the class speaker. So I invite myself to introduce her. And I go to Wilmer, and this is in June, and during this ugly, ugly campaign, and so much ugliness about immigrants and refugees. And so I go to this, to the commencement, and I'm on this. I see her beforehand. We have there's some coffee and cookies, and it's very Minnesota, and it's very everywhere, I guess. But and she gives me a big hug, and then I go out and sit on the stage with the principal and the superintendent, and the students are there in their caps and gowns, and the parents and family are there, and there's 236 members of the class. I open up the program, and looking at the names, I estimate that probably about 60 to 2/3% of 60% to 2/3 of the class is your standard white Scandinavian German Minnesotans. And this class president was Tate Hovland, and I asked Tate, and he was half Norwegian and half German. And about 15 or 20% were Latino, because this is a meat packing, turkey processing. And so Latinos came there a while ago. And the valedictorian, Meta Meramaran, was born in Ecuador. She's the valedictorian. And the class speaker was Muna, and the class is about 10 or 15% Somali. And these kids loved each other. And they have a really great orchestra and chorus. They do the Battle Hymn of the Republic at the end of their every graduation, and it's the most stirring rendition I've ever heard of it. But, it always starts with pomp and circumstance. And they came down by twos. And it was just like this. There's an aisle in the middle, and Muna Abdullahi, ABD. She's first in line. She's first in the class. And she comes down holding hands with Michelle Carlson. And my driver in Minnesota and I have this thing called Couldn't Be Cast Better. And sometimes you'll just meet a soybean producer, soybean grower, that just Hollywood could not cast a better soybean grower. Well, Michelle Carlson and Mary Carlson are the Carlson twins, and the Carlson twins could not have been cast better. And they're both, and on the program, it had a number of asterisks by your name. 1 asterisk meant you graduated with honors, 2 is high honors, 3 was highest honors. And both, of course, both the Carlson twins graduated with highest honors. And they were tall, and they just emanated positivity and love. And she and Muna came down holding hands. And the whole thing was like that. And Tate gave a great address as the president, welcoming as the president. Mehta gave a beautiful address as a valedictorian. When I introduced Muna, she got a huge ovation. When she finished, she got a standing ovation. We did Battle Hymn of the Republic. And then my job was to take pictures, with the graduates after they got their diploma. And they said, okay, before we start, we're going to announce each graduate and hold your applause until the end. So they go, okay, Muna Abdullahi, the whole place goes nuts. And people are stomping on the bleachers. And then it continues through every kid. These kids loved each other. Election day, I went to the University of Minnesota. Muna is a student there. There are 40,000 students at the University of Minnesota. I see Muna. I run into Muna. And she tells me that her sister had been named homecoming queen. And about a week after the election, I returned back to the Capitol, to D.C. I met with the French ambassador. And I just asked him, I said, just what do people in France, who do they consider a Frenchman? He said, well, most people in France consider a Frenchman somebody who can trace back the French village that their family came from a few hundred years ago. And I go, yeah, well, you're immigrants and your refugees are here. You keep them pretty segregated, right? And he goes, well, unfortunately, yes. And French don't consider them Frenchmen, right? And we say a lot of them don't. And we're all immigrants, except for American Indians, who we committed a genocide against, but we're all immigrants. And when he told me that, I thought about Paris, what had happened in Paris. And I thought about our country. In our country, we vote them homecoming queen. That's America. That's America. So I'm optimistic. I am. We're going through a rough period now. Now, we have time for some questions. Why don't I open it up for some questions, and you can just raise your hand, and I'll call on you. Yes?
So a number of years ago, I remember well when you and Ariana Huffington were in bed together and did your...
This was on TV in front of cameras, right.
Yes. And you were covering the respective political conventions.
I don't know if people can hear, but I'll repeat it. She's talking about when Ariana Huffington and I, on Politically Incorrect, did this thing called Strange Bedfellows. And we were in bed together on Politically Incorrect. On Politically Incorrect. The show. It was a TV show. Okay, go ahead.
Now, since then, it seemed like Ariana Huffington's political perspective...
Yeah, at the time she was a Republican, and she's moved to the left.
Yes, and was that because of you?
Yes. The question is, did Ariana move to the left because of me? And I like to think I had something to do with it. She really wasn't a big fan of Bob Dole's, really, but she had for the sake of it. And we actually did like debates where she was, we got this is when I was on the lucrative lecture circuit, and she and I would sometimes be teamed up, and at a certain point she just went, forget it, I give up. I'm not the Republican anymore. She's really interesting. When one of my books, Lies and Lying Liars Who Tell Them, A Fair and Balanced Look at the Right, which came out in 2003, was a huge bestseller because Fox, at Bill O'Reilly's insistence, sued me. And Ariana said, it's as if Bill O'Reilly walked up to you and handed you a check for $1 million. And of course, it was just all a big misunderstanding. Bill O'Reilly didn't understand that satire is protected speech in the United States, even if the object of the satire doesn't get it. That's true. It's true. Okay. Yes, and then I'll go back there. I'll work my way back. Yes.
You said that we should contact our friends in swing states or Republican states and get them to contact their senators. What else can we here do to really make a difference? Because we've got to fix it.
Okay. The question is sort of the existential question of what do you do to change things? One of the things I say is get active in an activist group. You'll be surprised how much difference advocates make. And it can be on anything you want. If you care about the homeless, if you care about clean water, if you care about mental illness, whatever it is, if you care about climate, join a group. Be an activist. And you'll be surprised how fast you can go from a foot soldier to an officer in that army. And those people, I end up in rooms with them all the time. And and they come to Washington a lot, or I see them in my state, and they make a big difference. And it's because you start to know stuff, and you start to make connections with people, and you can become influential. That requires a little patience, but it's actually also fun. People volunteering, it's better for your health. It is. And you can do stuff that isn't necessarily political. But, okay, I promised back there, and I'll come to you, I guess. You and you, the people sitting across from each other.
Quick question. Trump's voter commission, can you talk about that?
Yeah, okay.
Talk a little bit about the G20 summit that's going on right now. Is it still as relevant as it used to be?
Okay, first, the voting commission, that's a fraud. And I love that, that Trump insisted on, a commission to study whether the 3 to 5 million, or to investigate the 3 to 5 million who undocumented immigrants who voted all for Hillary, every one of them, so that's why he didn't lose the popular vote. I love that he insisted that be investigated. It reminded me of O.J. Simpson after he was acquitted saying, I'm going to spend the rest of my life looking for the killer. So that's bogus. The G20, I think that it's significant when these people meet, and I think it'll be interesting to see if they talk. I mean, I think China and Japan are there, and Russia, and South Korea. I think South Korea is there, and so we have a situation right now, and also he'll be meeting with Putin. And it'll be interesting to see how mad he is about the interference in the election. Because Trump's a really tough guy, and I'm sure he'll really stand up to Putin. Yes. Okay, where do you stand on it? my thing is there's just no perfect way to do it. There's no perfect way to have an election. Now, if you do the popular vote, some things will happen, which is, I think it'll change the way people campaign, and maybe that's good. Maybe it'll mean that you'll just get a lot more people here in California because California is pretty much taken for granted. Except, we do need your money. Remember, that's very important. If you come away with one idea from this whole thing, it's just how important it is that you give us money, the Democrats. That's just a fact. I think I should stop now, so you remember that. But I just don't know a perfect way to do this because there's a downside to each. Our founding fathers said that every state would get 2 senators. And, I don't know how I explain to Mike Enzi and John Barrasso that the fact that they're there is ridiculous, that they're both there. But that's the way it is. And so I don't think there is one perfect way. There is a way to do it. The way to get rid of it is you have enough state legislatures to vote that they will give their electors, the state will have to give their electors to whoever wins the popular vote, but that it doesn't kick in until you get a majority of, you get enough states that you get a majority of the electors agree with that. States that have a majority of the electors to do it. And so there is a way to do it that isn't about amending the Constitution, because that would be impossible, I think. Did I promise him? I did promise you, right? What? Final question. Who wants the final question? Well, that was a joke. Okay, how do I promised that guy he'd ask a question, and he's just...
Senator, would you ever consider running for president?
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, my book agent. No, I've been asked that quite a bit, and it's a very, very high pressure job. And I think that there is this aspect of Trump being president that does make a lot of people think, well, you'd be better, and I don't think that's like, so I think a lot of people will run, and I don't think I'm going to be one of them. Well, I know it's disappointing for you, but not so much for my family. But thank you. It's very flattering, and it is very flattering. And, it's just a lot of, there's a lot at stake all the time. And it's a tough, tough job. And I've seen it up a little bit closer as a senator than I did as a comedian. And, but it's very nice of you to say that. Okay, I'm sorry. I gotta go. I can't do one more question. No, I have to go to Berkeley and do a thing. So everybody, thank you.